Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffman coming back at you with another APUSH video. This is our second video from topic 7.13, focusing in on World War II military. Last time we were here, we talked about how the Allies were able to achieve victory over the Axis powers. Today we're going to be taking a look at how the, last time we looked at it in Europe. This time we're going to take a look at how the Allied forces are going to secure victory in World War II over the Japanese in the Pacific. Now, similar to the Germans and the Italians in Europe and North Africa, the Japanese had been off to a considerable amount of success in the Western Pacific for the first couple years of the war. If you take a look at this map right here, you'll see in this area kind of bounded by a red dotted line, you can see all of the areas of the Western Pacific that the Japanese will eventually acquire, dominate by early 1942. Now note, the United States until December 1941 was not technically involved in the war, so the Japanese are going to be able to pretty easily dominate their Chinese and Southeast Asian neighbors. But of course, following the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States is now going to be officially at war. But note, just because the United States officially enters into the war doesn't mean that the tide has turned quite yet. For example, the Philippines are going to be quickly taken over by the Japanese. General Douglas MacArthur, as he is retreating, famously says, "I shall return." But at the moment, does not look good in the Western Pacific. You can see, once again, this is thousands of square miles that the Japanese are now controlling. And note, with the Philippines now having been lost to the Japanese, now you're going to be seeing the Japanese setting their sights on Australia, Hawaii, Alaska, etc. Now, this is going to lead to some very significant battles that will, turn the tide of the war in favor of the Allies. Most importantly, out here at Midway. In June 1942, we're going to see Japanese forces attempt to take the island. If Midway were to fall to the Japanese, then the Hawaiian Islands would be an even easier target than it was already. The United States is going to, though, rise to the occasion. Japanese naval vessels will be destroyed in mass. In fact, most of the aircraft carriers in the Japanese fleet will be destroyed. So the Battle of Midway is going to be a very, very critical victory for the U.S. So with the victory at Midway, you're going to see that this is going to be the ultimate turning of the tide in the war in favor of the United States and the Allies. Following Midway, you will not see the Japanese be able to expand anymore. It will just be a series of retreats over the next 3 years for the Japanese as the Allies gain ground. Now note, the way that the United States is going to be able to, counteract the Japanese is through a pivotal strategy known as island hopping. And basically the way island hopping works is that as you look at this map here of the Western Pacific, it's literally thousands and thousands of islands that are there. And, the idea of we're going to recapture every single island in the Western Pacific, that's not really practical. The idea being is that you're going to target certain specific islands to capture that will then bring us step by step to get within bombing distance of the home islands of Japan. So that's really what it is. And once again, you're kind of bouncing as you're literally hopping, hence the name, from island to island to get closer and closer. Now, note, there's going to be some critical battles that are going to be part of this process. For example, you've got here Guadalcanal down here in the Solomon Islands. That's going to be some significant victories. This is going to be following the significant battle at Coral Sea, which even predated Midway. This victory, mostly done by the Brits and the Australians, are going to be keeping the Japanese off of the continent of Australia. Note, as we get further and further along, you're going to be able to see that that we're going to get closer and closer, to these home islands. Each of these victories are going to be costly. In fact, each subsequent one will be even costlier than the preceding ones. But we will start to turn the tide around. As you can see here at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, we're going to eventually be able to reclaim the Philippines by fall of 1945. This is coming off earlier victories at Saipan and Guam. So we're getting closer, step by step, month by month, year by year. Then we start to get into 1945 with key victories here at Iwo Jima and then Okinawa. These two battles in particular are going to be very, very costly. You know, you are talking about trying to fight on volcanic rock. You've got dug-in Japanese soldiers. You have the culture of the Japanese fighting force, you know, death before dishonor. You don't surrender. A willingness to engage in kamikaze tactics. The casualty rates will be exceptionally high at these battles. You are talking tens of thousands of American casualties for each of these victories. But despite that, victories will be attained. As you can see, this one famous raising of the flag after the Battle of Iwo Jima. Through this sacrifice, you're going to see the United States start to get within bombing distance of the home islands of Japan, as you can see here. Now, of course, as we get into the spring of 1945, the war in Europe is now already over. The Germans have already surrendered, which then means that there's going to be a little bit of a changing of how this is going to be operating. Because up to this point, the United States had really been doing the lion's share of the fighting. Yes, you've had assistance, obviously, from some Brits, you know, through Australia, some help with via the Chinese, some French assistance, you know, in Southeast Asia. But the vast majority of the fighting had been done by the United States. And note who had been absent up to this point, the Soviet Union. They had basically put all of their resources to the West. Well, now that the Germans have surrendered, now that the Soviets are now going to be able to, and they will very quickly start to move into the Pacific theater. And this is only going to hasten some of the decisions that the United States is going to be making to kind of wrap up the war. Because, you know, as the war is clearly starting to wind down, the Germans have already surrendered, the Italians have already surrendered, only the Japanese remain, and it's not a matter of, you know, will the Japanese surrender, it's just a matter of how long it will take. We already know where the next phase of international relations is going to be going, and it's going to be leading to a bit of a strain between us and the Soviet Union. Remember, we are only allies by convenience due to a shared set of enemies, but there is a clear understanding that we don't really trust the Soviets long-term, and they don't really trust us long-term. Obviously, we already are seeing the roots of the Cold War before this war officially ends. So with that being understood, with new President Harry Truman in office, the White House is going to be learning about a secret operation that will be taking place out in the deserts of New Mexico. And that is going to be, of course, the Manhattan Project. Led by J. Robert Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project is going to be developing the first nuclear weapons. This is going to be, this is weaponry unlike anything humans had ever even conceived before. So, think back just a generation earlier, what we had with World War I with the machine guns and the tanks and planes and, the thought that there had been just this tremendous innovation in military technology. And now it's just exponentially improving in terms of, destructiveness. So now by the end of the summer of 1945, we now have this technology. We've tested it in Nevada. It works. The question is, do we use it? Even though it is tested, we know it works. We don't know the long-term effects of what this is going to be. But Harry Truman makes a calculation. The Japanese government, despite losses in recent years, has not shown any type of willingness to surrender. Once again, there is a death before dishonor culture in the military in Japan. And Truman is going to be advised that if the United States engages in a traditional invasion of Japan, you were talking about what could be another 1.5 to 3 more years of fighting in Japan, urban fighting. Casualty rates for the United States would likely exceed, 500,000. And you're talking upwards of, well over 1 million Japanese casualties on their end. At the same time, as this is taking longer, to play out, if we were to do a traditional invasion of Japan, keep in mind the Soviets are now pouring troops into northeastern China, and that's going to be significant because we already are seeing in Eastern Europe the places that have been quote unquote liberated by the Soviets. Those troops haven't left, and there's a sinking suspicion that those troops may never leave. And so, if we are not big fans of communism, we want to hasten the end of this war as fast as possible because we don't want any more Soviet communist dominance than we absolutely have to. So these are going to be some of the driving forces that are going to force President Truman to make a fateful decision. The decision on August 6, 1945, to detonate the first ever nuclear weapon on the town of Hiroshima. And as you can see here, the results are going to be nothing short of devastating. Hiroshima, it will be basically obliterated. The immediate death toll, you're talking upwards of 80,000 people initially. We know that many thousands more will die in the weeks, months, and years following. But even that horrific example of destruction is not going to be enough to force the Japanese government to surrender. So a couple days later, a second bomb will be detonated, this time on the city of Nagasaki. When the totals are added up, we're talking both initial and long-term fatalities of upwards of 250,000 Japanese people. And that, of course, raises some very important ethical questions. You're talking about the vast majority of these folks that were killed or were casualties are civilians. So you're talking about, women and children. Should civilians be paying the cost of the decisions that governments and militaries make? This certainly is going to have some far-flung consequences. It certainly sends a message to the Soviet Union. It tells the Soviet Union and really the world that the United States now has almost godlike weaponry at its disposal, and more importantly, especially for the Soviet Union, we're not afraid to use them. Which, if you haven't figured this out yet, this is certainly going to be something that will instigate the Cold War's arms race following World War II, no question about it. But once again, though, the argument is that if we don't end the war as soon as possible, more people may die. There may be expansion of communist influence in Asia, and those are things that we didn't want to have happen. So, these are very, very tough decisions that we see in history. But bottom line, Japan will formally surrender at the end of the summer in 1945, and with it, the end of World War II, the deadliest conflict in all of human history. So we'll leave it there for now. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.